Hey, welcome to the stream. This is the pre-show where we discuss some of the issues of the day before we get deeper into our actual TV broadcast. Following the television broadcast, you can come back and join us right here at stream.aljazeera.com to get a little deeper into some of the issues that we've brought up. Ahmed, what kind of stuff is going on in the news today?
There's an update on the IMF story. This is coming from Africa. So essentially, South Africa is hoping that the next IMF chief, perhaps as a result of what's happening with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, will be from a developing country. They're saying, here's the quote. So on Wednesday, they basically called for someone to choose, for the IMF to choose someone from a developing country following the arrest of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, and they're saying they must reform institutions like the IMF so that they can be credible, basically saying it's not a credible institution.
You know, I think that's really interesting. Nora, I'd love to get your thoughts on this because in my experience, a lot of people in the developing world do not believe that the IMF has got their best interests at heart.
Right.
And it's a very colonial sort of mentality that says, yes, we're going to have an organization basically run by exclusively Westerners, and they're going to come in and instruct you on how to develop your economy.
I think it's important to consider different values and different cultures if you structure any kind of financial institutions, and so this call is absolutely overdue, actually.
That's really interesting. That's what Ayman was kind of talking about.
Exactly, and it's funny because you look at institutions like the United Nations, which is a great example of a multilateral, a multi-global organization, and you see the leadership shifting and changing and reflecting the world.
Right.
But you look at the
IMF,
at least seemingly, right? Yeah. You know, we know that
where the funding comes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole other story. But at least the faces change. You look at something like the IMF, and I mean, I don't know if it was directly before Strauss-Kahn, but most of the leadership has not really come out of places like the developing world, whether it's IMF, where it's the World Bank. Yeah. And so you start to question, especially since you had, 40, 50 years of some of these development programs, and a lot of these countries it hasn't seemed to work for them.
Right.
And I think that's going to be the interesting thing about this whole saga. Will we move beyond talking about the salacious story of what happened with Strauss-Kahn, and will it open up to a different kind of conversation about the role of these institutions?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's, if you think about it, like even the World Bank, I mean, there's tons of institutions like this, and you spoke of the UN too, but even though a lot of these institutions are doing most of the work in the developing world, like in the developing countries, not only do they not have representation, meaning there's misrepresentation of the developing world, but, oftentimes they're not consulted.
The local understanding is missing. I mean, just the local realities, what is going on and where things needed. And if you look at, for example, Mohammed Yunus from Bangladesh, he came up with microcredits, which is such a successful, so effective. He understood the mentality, he understands what's needed right there, and so we need more of these innovative ideas that are just not following a structure that's been done for the past, I don't know how many
decades,
100 years.
Sometimes they're not effective, and that's the issue. That people, I think, that's ultimately what South Africa is trying to address. Like, perhaps if we had a developing leader, then someone from the developing world, it would be a more effective institution.
Well, this reminds me of something that's slightly separate but connected in the sense of where leadership comes from. I was at a conference, a TED conference that they did, TED Global, in Arusha, Tanzania a few years ago, and we came to find out that, you think about like satellite radio, and people think of things like Sirius and XM in the United States and how they have, significant reach and, pretty technologically advanced, whatever, although they have a lot of economic problems right now. But still, the model for satellite radio actually didn't come out of the United States. It actually began with an Ethiopian entrepreneur who was looking at how radio is so prevalent in Africa. It's one of the most dominant means of broadcast communication. And how do we get news from around the continent or reach the whole continent?
I think in general, any kind of cross-disciplinary approach always helps for innovation, where just different experiences, opinions clash, and there's some kind of tension that always gives new projects.
So I want to throw in another idea there. Yeah. So some people have said, and I remember reading a book that was called Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yes.
And it made some very strong allegations.
Great book.
And I've heard him speak before, but I won't say that I necessarily concur with everything he's alleging, but it was very thought-provoking.
Eye-opening,
What do you think about the idea that maybe some of these institutions the real, what are the incentives? I mean, what is the benefit to them to actually see these countries develop? Is it to have them develop, or is it to sort of maintain certain kinds of global economic orders?
What's so interesting about that question is I think that question is being addressed to so many different paradigms that we're seeing across
absolutely.
the world. Like in Egypt, like the status quo, Mubarak was just in power for that. I know I keep referencing Egypt.
All about Egypt.
But also, in like a lot of these international organizations, they are made up of nations, and they always have a self-interest to survive, right? So you need the resources, you need your trade.
Exactly. And it's so interesting because like now, like we're talking about, the Arab revolutions or Arab awakening, Arab Spring. You're talking about what's happened in Pakistan and the rise of the Taliban and where people thought Osama bin Laden is dead or alive. And a lot of people are talking about conspiracy theories that come up in these areas. But part of the reason you have conspiracy theories in certain regions is because people have been victims of certain kinds of conspiracies. My whole thing is a lot of the stuff, the insidious stuff that goes on in society, it doesn't require a conspiracy.
Yeah, it's true.
You can literally look and you can say, who is running this? Where's the money come from?
Why are they running?
What would be in their interest?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like I watch the news cycle of late and I feel it's either protests or elections. And the reason I bring this up is because, or it's Twitter or Facebook. That's my limited scope. But the reason I bring it up is because, on the note of talking about South Africa, I think polls just closed in South Africa today, and in the municipal elections. And it's interesting because we saw that Jacob Zuma just finally got on Twitter and he's trying to engage that demographic. So I don't know, any ideas as to what to expect about that? I mean, we have people are saying that they're showing that there were some glitches, but it was generally a smooth election, and that's quite encouraging. I mean, whatever. I don't know if there were monitors, but
Well, I mean, the question is how much, like, what is the status of the ANC and their level of credibility that they have with the people right now? And I think that what you find after a while is any party, however successful or historic, is going to get some significant criticism internally because people are always going to want more.
Right.
And so I'm just curious to see how well they do. It looks like we're getting close to the time when we begin, so we're going to wrap it up. For those of you joining us online, we're about to go to air. We're bringing you a really interesting show today, so we'll see you in just a few seconds. Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in the stream, a social media community with its own daily TV show. We're bringing you the stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, the kidney you need is a breath away, but how willing is the donor? And no longer invisible, one woman gives voice to the plight of domestic workers in the Gulf. We're happy to update our community with the news that Al Jazeera journalist Dorothy Parvaz, who was missing for 19 days, has arrived safely in Doha. A big thanks to everyone who supported our appeal for her release. Keep a lookout on Al Jazeera's website for Dorothy's exclusive first-hand account of her detention and return. As always, joining us is our digital producer, Ahmed Shihab Eldin, keeping tabs on what's going on online. Also with us today is Nora Abousteit. She's a member of the founding team behind the DLD, or Digital Life Design Conference. Nora, tell us briefly, what is DLD all about?
Yeah, DLD is one of the leading media conferences in Europe every year in Munich. And there's people like Mark Zuckerberg or artists like Olafur Eliasson, architects like Norman Foster. It's a cross-disciplinary conference, and people give talks and network for new ideas, and that's it.
Well, it obviously sounds like the kind of place we should be. Maybe next year we'll take a
trip. Yeah, welcome.
Absolutely. Ahmed, tell us what people are talking about online.
Well, actually, we spoke earlier this week about protests in Spain. We were alerted to this story. Essentially, over 50 cities, across 50 cities in Spain, tens of thousands of people have been protesting austerity measures. They feel as though the government has a central, or rather banks and politicians have a central role in the worsening financial crisis. And so we're following this story, and we got a tweet today from Gavilan, who's, saying that the protests are spreading, and the use of the hashtag now #YesWeCamp is one way that you can also follow this story. We also have some visual elements coming from Anon 2060. As you can see here, this is a photo from Madrid, I believe, on Tuesday. And this is at Puerta del Sol, the square where people are gathering. And what they're demanding is not only jobs, but economic equality and real democracy, or what they're calling real democracy. And to give you just a sense of how many people have gathered at this square, as you can see, tens of thousands of people have gathered at this square. We also have a map that was sent to us by Gavilan that's showing all the places where people are sitting in and camping.
So people are really concerned about the economic situation on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, unemployment in Spain is over 20%, so it's the highest in the Eurozone. And Nora, maybe you could talk as an Egyptian and as a German. We've seen protests in the Arab world, but now also in Europe. What do you make of this spirit of protest?
Yeah, I think it's about the youth, actually. And they are idealistic, they're fearless, they don't lose anything, they don't have any self-vested interest, and at the same time, they're very tech savvy, they're connected, and so they can organize easily large crowds and demonstrate like what we see right now.
Exactly, and remember, if you want to get into the stream, if you have something to say, you can, like Gavilan, share a story with us. Just tweet us at AJStream.
Hi, I'm Ahmed Muhyiddin. Ayman Muhyiddin's brother, famous Al Jazeera reporter, and I'm on the stream.
Organ donation is a life-saving act, but it's also considered taboo in many cultures around the world. With demand far outstripping supply, transplant patients can wait years for a kidney or liver, and some in desperation end up turning to the underground market where trafficked organs are bought and sold. I want to open this conversation with a video that we found, and this is basically of victims of organ trafficking in Cairo.
ندمانة إلا ندمانة ربنا يعلم يعني ربنا يعلم أنا ندمانة بجد ربنا يعلم
الصحة اللي ندمت عليها الصحة كانت هتصلح أي حاجة.
Now, as you can see, in looking at this, I mean, in a nutshell, or to give some more clarification, these are people who voluntarily gave up their organs. And the reason they did so is because there's real money to be made from this. I mean, we were looking at some statistics from China, and we found that organs can be sold from anywhere around $3,000-4,000 to $12,000. What makes it a little bit dangerous, though, is that those same organs can then be sold on the market for $200,000.
The disparity is crazy.
Exactly, the disparity is crazy.
I think that the term voluntarily is a bit dangerous in this. And mostly people do this because they're not informed well. And they have no idea about what happens once you do that. Maybe you have a quick $5,000 on your hand, which is a lot if you earn like $200 a year.
Exactly.
But the post-care, that's a lot of times that's what's forgotten.
Well, and the reason we use voluntary in this context is because we have had some allegations made of people actually having their organs forcibly removed, and we don't know if this is really true. And we want to talk about a journalist who actually made some of those allegations or heard about these stories, get a little deeper into that very question. Joining us to discuss this is Christopher Arsenault. He's one of our web producers in Doha, and he's covered the topic. We also have with us Dr. Deborah Budianu Saberi. She's the director and co-founder of the Coalition for Organ Failure Solutions, which actually put together the video that we just saw. So Chris and Deborah, thank you both for joining us. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you.
Great to be here, Derek.
Awesome. Now, Chris, I want to jump right in. We saw a piece that you posted online. There were some, it's there on our Al Jazeera website, but there were some very interesting anecdotes that, as you mentioned in the piece, it's difficult to substantiate. One that really jumped at us was this idea, what was recounted to you by a friend that, or someone in Mexico, that he had been captured, or a friend had been captured, and had his wife's organs forcibly removed. Tell us a little bit about that story, and what do we make of things like that when we don't know how to verify them?
Well, just to give some context, Eric, I was traveling with a group of migrants from Central America. These are folks who were going from Guatemala or Honduras into the U.S. to look for work. And when they cross Mexican territory, they aren't Mexican citizens, they're there illegally, and they're extremely vulnerable because they have no status whatsoever. And I think vulnerability to the law or to the authorities really makes this happen a lot worse. So this man I was talking to, a friend of his, had been captured by a gang, presumably one of the various drug cartels in Mexico. So he was taken to a house-turned clinic, and his wife and him were separated in these two different rooms. He heard these horrible screams from his wife, and he was just sitting there handcuffed, waiting to see what kind of fate would happen to him. The military busted into this house while he was still alive, and when the screams from his wife had stopped. And when they rescued him, he went into the other room to see his wife cut from chest to chin, with her heart and her kidneys removed. This is what he told me when I interviewed him in a small town in Mexico. Mm-hmm. It's horrendous stuff. I've talked to some researchers.
Let me jump right in there, Chris, because I want to bring Dr. Saberi in. Doctor, so we know that in order to have an organ transplant made and for these transplants to be successful, the organs have to be kept with a certain degree of, in a certain pristine environment. So when you hear of tales like this, is this the kind of thing you're coming across in your own work? Or are you seeing other examples of this traffic?
Thank you. I'd like to clarify a few matters. First, directly in response to your question, organs don't travel well by themselves. They travel best inside persons. So persons are trafficked for the removal of organs, and it works best when there's been sufficient tissue typing and blood matching for suiting the donor to the recipient. So in the case that Chris just described, it's very possible that this happens. It's not the usual form. Still, it's possible that it happens, especially with some of the incentives in Mexico right now given by a insurance company in the U.S., namely Arizona. So it's possible, but for it to be successful, there needed to be some coordination between the donor and recipient and lab tests going on.
I want to actually speak a little bit to that point of coordination because we were, and I want to actually jump into what's happening in Egypt a little more because I know, Dr. Saberi, you do have some expertise there. But we also saw some information on the rise of transplant tourism and what's been happening in China, and the idea that people are actually being attracted online at the prospect of getting a life-saving surgery. They agree to a price, they fly to China, and then when they get there, you find that a lot of these organs are being transplanted from prisoners who are on death row, and China has a very high rate of actually putting people on death row.
I was surprised. I found so many online. There were so many message boards, or that clinic that you were just referring to in Arizona. You can get a kidney in Mexico for $50,000. Well, and I mean, I found it in like few clicks, so it seems so easy.
And the thing is,
it's very real.
What winds up happening is you get there and you're thinking you're getting this kidney for $50,000, but then they put you up in a bid with every other patient they've attracted there to get that first kidney from maybe a death row inmate or maybe
and then
from a
I don't
poor
know
person.
if that kidney actually works with me too if I'm a patient.
Exactly. And so to go back to you, Dr. Saberi, on this, you know, how is it that poor people are impacted and drawn into this prospect of selling tissue for profit?
Well, this goes back to the beginning question of voluntarism. It's certainly not any sort of form of volunteer. It's a form of induced consent and destitution. And that's when there is any sort of form of consent. And like Nora said, there's not proper information provided, but it's really based on destitution. So it's the poorest amongst the poor who are willing to part with an organ that's not disposable to them. It's not like a flat tire that we can just spare a kidney, especially amongst these populations that are not as healthy and can meet criteria, that resort to it to maybe get food for their families, maybe get medical care for their children. So it's a real act of destitution and plays of power amongst those brokers and medical professionals who target them.
Doctor, I understand that you have a trafficking hotline planned for Egypt and that Egypt has a particularly tenuous situation given the political instability currently, and that Egypt is changing laws so that organ transplants can only be done in government-run hospitals. What are your concerns? Maybe you can speak to the particular case in Egypt.
Egypt is a fascinating case. The law did pass before the revolution, and the law clearly, for the first time, permits deceased donation and outlaws organ trafficking. Before the revolution and after the passing of the law, little was done to really start deceased organ donation and execute the law enforcement for ending organ trafficking. So clearly now transplants and the addressing of organ trafficking cannot be a priority in the interim period post-revolution. And the concerns we have are, one, that this transitional period is also a time where trafficking of human beings for all purposes can flourish because there's not institutional oversight or even proper authorities in place yet to give that kind of oversight. And if, in fact, deceased donation does commence before there's a stable authority and oversight given, then our concerns are with the abuses of the deceased for the purposes
I want to draw Chris back into this conversation because it seems to me that there's a real opportunity for corruption to become a factor in this. And Chris, I'm just wondering, from your own research in Mexico and other places that you've looked at, to what degree is this something that is actually sanctioned by states, whether ostensibly or as part of an underground market?
Sure. Well, a number of states, including Pakistan, have moved to put some laws to make this process more difficult, and I think that's a positive step. And the World Health Organization believes that's a positive step also, even if it's difficult to enforce those laws at the same time. So I think on the one hand, you have this kind of institutional battle to try to have more countries pass laws against this, take this seriously, and enforce those laws. And then on the
I'm sorry, we have a question from Nora. Go ahead.
I mean, is it really the solution to pass the laws? When I did my research, I found that a lot of people were arguing that, if you pass these laws, this gives the room for the underground. So people will want to sell their organs. If they're not allowed to, they do it illegally, which means they won't have the medical care or any kind of regulations. So I'm just wondering, is it really the solution? I mean,
so this is interesting.
I'm not an expert.
No, I'm so glad you brought this up, because one of the things that we were saying, and I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Sperry, there, is that in some places, actually, the question is, if you pass the laws, if you have a corrupt government, let's say in Egypt, we've seen there's a lot of corruption that's happened historically in the government there. They're in a very transitionary phase. Let's say you pass these laws that liberalize the ability to get transplanted organs. Is the corruption that used to be there going to disappear, or is it just going to become something that is basically swept into that pool of corruption? Right. Doctor, can you speak to that?
Well, I think there's some important components that go with laws, but first and foremost, a legal framework that regulates transplants and prohibits organ trafficking is essential, but in themselves are not sufficient, like we can see with all kinds of abuses of laws. It also requires goals for nations to try to create self-sufficiencies in organ supplies by enhancing deceased and altruistic organ donation. It also requires that there's enforcement, adequate enforcement, that there's local level investigations of the loopholes and transplant centers, that there's public awareness campaigns to combat the trade about alternatives, and especially from a victim's perspective, that there are avenues for victims to report this as a crime or a legal violation.
To that point, Dr. Sperry, I want to ask one last question before I let you go, and that is, I understand that in Egypt, their culture actually does not condone this idea of organ transplantation. I can say even from my culture in Ghana, it's not something that comes that is organic to the way we see ourselves. Many cultures believe that the body must be pristine when you die, the sanctity of the body. So if that is present in Egypt, first, if you could confirm if that's the case, and if so, what level of desperation or poverty is present that must be driving people to consider something that might be so far against their culture?
Well, we have to distinguish between deceased and living organ donation, and there is, in fact, a sanctity for the dead and keeping the body whole in burial. That's both Islamic-based and cultural as well. But we have to be, from a public health perspective, convinced that with health promotion and awareness about the benefits of organ donation, that there will be willingness increased amongst the society simply because of the life-saving measures that are resulted from this preferred therapy.
You just mentioned cultural and religious differences, and Sheikh Tantawi, who's the head of the Al-Azhar institution, the biggest Sunni institution, he actually in 2009, he endorsed, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but he endorsed the brain death standard. So he actually said it's okay to give your organ, which is a big step. He's, the biggest
guy. We've read that in Egypt from a religious perspective. People are saying, okay, it's fine. But from their cultural perspective,
because of the Quranic history.
In the Islamic world have actually been promoting it.
Religion influences the culture.
Absolutely.
So him saying that, a lot of people listen to that. So it's a big step, and that happened 2 years ago.
Well, this is a story that, I'm sorry, Dr. Saberi, if you could respond briefly. Go ahead.
If we have to also consider that there's competing claims like from that of Sha'arawi, who was absolutely opposed. And so these elements have made a very rich and energetic and nuanced debate in Egypt that the society is deeply involved in trying to sort out definitions of death, let alone whether or not organs should be procured from the dead.
Well, this is another story that we definitely want to keep our eyes peeled on. And thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Saberi, and also Chris Arsenault from Doha. We appreciate your insights onto this. Remember, if you want to share your own stories with us, if you want us to cover something that you've been thinking about, definitely tweet us directly at AJStream.
My name is Haik Nahapetian. I am the Washington correspondent for the public TV company of Armenia. I am running the Washington office of the Armenian TV, and I am part of the stream.
OFW. It stands for Overseas Filipino Worker, and the United Arab Emirates is home to an estimated 500,000, more than half of which are women employed as domestic workers. But the UAE is not alone. Expats from poor countries are the backbone of many Gulf economies, with foreigners taking most of the manual labor jobs. And while the money earned serves as a lifeline for their families back home, many of these workers face exploitation and even abuse. As we were researching this story, we found a really compelling and interesting video, and I just want to show you a couple of clips directly from it. This is a video that was created by a youth group called Middle East Youth, and it talks about these young people standing up for the rights of migrant workers. Let's take a look at this one.
Paying attention to news stories about migrant workers here in the Middle East. Headline after...
The video is buffering a little bit. Let's go. Here we go. One more time.
Commits suicide. Construction workers starved to death. Maid beaten. Driver killed. Yet little is being done about it. A vast sea of foreigners pour into the Gulf to work as manual laborers, domestics, and drivers. Saudi Arabia alone absorbs 500,000 housemates per year who've left their worlds behind to work for complete strangers who are free to abuse them or even choose not to pay them.
Now, this video, in a nutshell, is made by this organization, and as we look at their website, we see that Mideast Youth is designed, their focus is to inspire and provide young people the freedom and opportunity of expression and to promote a fierce but respectful dialogue about things that matter. Well, this is the kind of thing that is not often discussed, especially as it relates to countries that people would think of as wealthy. Joining us now from Dubai is Sally. She's the author of the Dubai Sally blog, which chronicles the plight of migrant workers in that region. We are hiding her image for a moment, and we'll explain why shortly. But Sally, thank you so much for joining us. Can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, so Sally, you started this blog. It's been very successful, and it's been very compelling. It's basically the story of a Filipina maid, and she's an emigre brought to Dubai to work, and she talks about working for her mom and the experiences that she have, and it's gained a lot of attention. You've had a lot of media attention, tons of fans of this blog. So let's just get to the basics. Sally, are you a Filipina maid working in Dubai?
No, I am not. I'm actually just a regular, ordinary person. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a reporter. I'm just a regular girl who moved to Dubai, last year, and I was just exposed to this whole parallel world of migrant workers. And, I was almost blown away by this army of what I call worker bees who are working so hard, behind the scenes to make the lives of so many people easier. And I just started talking to them, and I realized they all had these really remarkable stories to tell, but not necessarily the access or the ability or the means to tell these stories. And, the other thing I also realized that it didn't matter where they came from, whether they came from the Philippines or whether they came from India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. All their stories had a common thread, and that was the thread of hardship, of sacrifice, of a struggle to make ends meet, and of being the sole provider for their families back home. And I just wanted to be the voice of all these untold stories.
Sally, we've actually got some interesting comments that Ahmed has found online from your blog. We want you to respond to this.
So Sally, here's your blog right here on my screen. I'm just going to scroll down to a post that you did about a week or two ago, and there's a back and forth in the comments section. One person saying, this is a work of fiction, it's a parody blog. That you're probably a writer or a reporter. Someone else comes back by saying, it could be a ruse, but it is definitely a Filipino writing it. That much I am sure of. And the last thing we'll mention is, someone says, real or not real, she is a voice among many, and in the video age, it is not something Dubai will want to endure for long. So what would you say to all these people commenting on your blog, and do you respond to them? What's your real goal?
Well, I would say that my objective here was really to just be the voice and to tell these untold stories. And I chose to tell them from the point of view of this, this girl, Sally, who's this maid who's not so perfect. I mean, she has all her quirks and her idiosyncrasies. She has broken English. And, I actually like to think of her as this girl with broken English, but with a spirit that cannot be broken. And, she lies because that's her defense mechanism that comes from years of servitude. And, she just is telling this story of what goes on behind closed doors.
Nora, I want to get your thoughts on this, because basically now you have an idea of someone who's seen something that they believe is going wrong, and they are taking on an assumed identity to speak to it. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think it's great. A lot of people can relate to round characters, I would say. And in order to raise awareness for an issue, it's always good to have some kind of personalization in that issue. And I think this is amazingly well done. And once more people relate to it, they can, rally up, and hopefully some of the laws change.
And, immigration sponsorship laws in a lot of these countries in the Arab world, especially in the Gulf, really give the sponsor, so to speak, the head of the household, a lot of control over these people, the control over their passports and so on.
Absolutely. Oftentimes people come in and they have to have their passports given over to the person who works with them.
Most people, and they have to live.
That, and this is in the Gulf. This is across the Gulf. Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. We're seeing these issues. So what I want to do now is, Dubai, Sally, I'd like to ask you to hold with us. For all of our people watching online, want to thank Nora and Ahmed. We're going to stay right here. You can join this conversation at stream.aljazeera.com. Tweet us at AJStream. We're going to see you right now online. Welcome. This is the Post Show. We are going to continue this conversation about the rights of migrant workers in the Gulf states. We have joining us Sally. This is a pseudonym. This is an assumed name because she writes the blog Dubai Sally. It talks about the life of a Filipina maid in Dubai. But as we've just found out, Sally is not Filipina and she's not a maid. Sally, are you concerned at all about the criticism that people might say, hey, you are just making this up? Why should we believe that there's a real concern of these people and the way these people are being treated if you yourself are not who you've stated you are on the blog?
Well, absolutely. I understand, where those people are coming from. But the thing to remember is that these stories exist. You read about them in the paper. You read about them on online forums. When you talk to these people, you hear these stories all the time. And, I just decided that I was going to be the voice. I'm no different really from a reporter who, finds out this story and reports about it in newspaper. The only difference is that I'm telling it from the point of view of the maid, because I wanted it to be compelling and I wanted it to be engaging. I wanted people to come back and read the blog again and again and to see what was going on in Sally's life.
And if you could just give us an anecdote, tell us something that you have seen in real life of the way that migrant workers are treated that you thought was problematic?
Well, you know, when I first moved to Dubai, I lived in a service department, and there was this guy who would come every day to clean the apartment, and I started talking to him. And I found out that he had a degree in hotel management. And I said, so why are you here? And he was, well, I thought I was coming over here to, you know, assume like a manager's position, to be a lobby manager or to do something more on a managerial level. Instead, I found that I was, you know, cleaning the rooms. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that just struck me as, wow, I mean, this actually really happens. This is a true life story. I've not heard it through somebody else. I've heard this one-on-one. And, you know, I said, why don't you just leave? Why don't you quit? And he said, you know, if I quit, I'll be breaking my contract, and I'll be, you know, I'll be banned or I'll be deported, and I'll lose my job.
And you won't have the opportunity to probably ever come back. Thank you, Sally, for taking the time to join us, for giving us the insights. This is the first time that you've announced to the world that you are, in fact, not that Filipina maid. We hope that it will not damage your blog, but that people will continue to be talking about what is a very important issue. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Ahmed.
I just want to share one tweet that came in from AEY. She is saying the laws need to change, but attitude comes before. So many of migrant workers from the Gulf are being treated wrongly elsewhere in Europe. Now, do you have any thoughts on this as someone who's from Europe originally?
Yeah, I think in general, a lot of migrant workers that just look different and maybe don't speak the language as well, they're not really looked upon as humans. And so I guess but in Europe there's more laws, and what you can see in the Gulf states, that residents are really second or third class citizens. They don't have the same human rights.
Even though they make up a majority of the population sometimes.
In many countries like Kuwait, it's the vast majority.
Yeah, Kuwait, 80% of the country's workforce are foreign nationals.
Well, it's interesting because I grew up in Qatar. I grew up in Doha. Yeah. And I remember Doha is also another nation with a primarily expatriate population. And I remember our gardener, when I lived there, was actually a lawyer in India. Yeah. But he came there and he was gardening. Now, I don't know if this was by choice or...
We're only talking about a lawyer being a gardener, but there is gruesome stories that I read about. There is maids that are being constantly raped by their hosts. They're being abused. They're being tortured.
Absolutely.
And the thing is, if they run away, they have to live with their employers. If they run away, they lose their permission to work. And that's...
Exactly.
Well, so they're in a big dilemma.
To that point, I just want to show, this is a piece I saw in Gulf News. And what you're raising is actually a really important issue. This piece is called Just in Case Your Maid Runs Away. And I just want to highlight a little bit when they say homemaids run away for or abscond for a variety of reasons, the most often cited being abuse and ill treatment. That's important. You would think that that would be the emphasis of the story. However, they go on to say some maids also run away as they get a better offer from another household, or they find it more lucrative to work on a part-time basis. Others get homesick and depressed and have to be sent home after they throw tantrums and refuse to work. And the thing that struck me from this is it's almost to what you were saying, Nora, that the humanity of these maids is not being seen. You're talking about they're throwing tantrums and refusing to work, but we've been seeing the UN Human Rights Commission has basically said, as you pointed out, Nora, that women are being sexually violated. They're being forced to work extensive hours. Many of them don't get any time off. They don't get that kind of access to...
I read another story where maids ran away and then they were kidnapped and they were supposed to be given free only through ransom. I mean, imagine...
It's a dehumanization, you know, and as someone who's seen this on a personal level happen in the Gulf, but also in other Arab countries, in Jordan and Egypt, but also, you know, in Europe, in Austria, this happens as well, in Germany. You know, there are institutions where foreign nationals, people from the Philippines come, and provided that someone's a diplomat, these same structures apply. And even though there are laws in Europe, sometimes, you know, there's ways around those laws because diplomatic immunity allows you to overstep some of those laws, even in Europe.
Well, I want to bring someone in who can give us some additional insight into what's happening on the ground. We're bringing us from Riyadh, John Leonard Monterona. He's the Middle East coordinator for Migrant Internacional, an organization that fights for the rights of Filipino workers. Welcome to the stream, John. Can you hear us?
Yes, hello.
Hi, John. We understand that a member of your organization from Dubai was supposed to join us, but he was concerned. And so we're hearing you from Riyadh. What is happening in Dubai that your colleague was not able to join?
Yeah, because, for security concern, because we have heard that there are some social activists who has been detained by the South government. So they decided to speak with you. But,
and could you tell us what are some of the challenges that Filipino workers are facing in the Gulf states?
There are a lot of challenges, these Filipino migrant workers here in Saudi Arabia.
I'm sorry, John. We're not getting a lot of your audio. We're going to see if we can try to fix the audio, and if so, we'll come back to you. But we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. We're getting a lot of feedback online, so let's hear a little bit of that.
In the meantime, Mar Barakat, whose real name on Twitter, it's worth mentioning, is Barakat for Free Libya, is also saying that he visited Dubai, and apparently every 3 days migrant workers commit suicide. Now, we talked about how this is dehumanization, but not that it can lead some people to suicide.
And he mentions that class is very predominant in the UAE. Now, we can't verify what he said, but the general message that we're getting from this and from the information that we have seen and verified is that there is a really difficult situation.
And they don't have a voice.
These people are basically a second class of citizens. So how do you consider something like that? You're living in a wonderful country, it's peaceful, it's good. If you came in under the right circumstances, everything is good, but there are people next door to you who are being dehumanized.
It's tough. I mean, and we spoke about legislation and the laws and the importance of laws, and the reason I reference this is because something as simple as a minimum wage law, which was introduced in the UAE in 1980, should be followed, but it's not being followed. So we have
and
laws
a lot of
in
times
place.
People don't get paid.
Yeah, that's the thing. So they're being driven. Right. Exactly.
And another point just to that is so one of the things that came out of the video, and we didn't get deep into it, is but the video from Mideast Youth, it opens with a young lady talking about, I was 9 years old the first time I saw a maid being beaten up by her boss. And in a way, and those kids, they literally, in their video, and people can join us and look at it on our website and see the storify of it and see the full video, but they're saying that they feel like it's a kind of modern-day slavery. And I want to point out that this issue, we talked about the trafficking of organs, but in human bodies, so therefore it's human trafficking. Human trafficking for menial labor and for sexual services is happening around the world, including in Europe, including in the United States. And I guess the question that's coming to my mind is, what do you do to address this? Because these people don't have any recourse. They can't go to the cops. They can't go to a judge.
Yeah, they can't even strike. Then they will. That's forbidden.
Someone has a solution to that question instantly that came in. I mean, honestly, Victor Bout is saying perhaps what migrant workers need a union and a voice that can speak, perhaps like Sally's, with the officials of the places they're being, as he says, enslaved.
But they're not allowed to. It's against
have a
the
union.
law.
Yeah, exactly.
They can't strike. They can't organize.
Yeah.
It's
so
really
the laws, in terms of international labor laws, countries have to be. They have to commit to these laws.
Right.
And it can't be that lawyers, that workers, that their passports are taken away, that they have to be confined in certain areas, that they have inhuman conditions when they live in tents that have no electricity, no sanitation, and that's I'm talking about the conditions that workers live in the Gulf.
I mean, that's the thing. It's a way of life.
Okay, and so this is something that, Nora, you brought up that I think is really worth emphasizing, which is we've been talking about in the context of Dubai Sally, the maids and home workers, but even construction workers and all kinds of workers that have come in that have built these amazing, beautiful societies are suffering under these heinous conditions.
I'm telling you, they built everything in the financial crisis. They were stuck in the country.
They could not return.
They could not return, and some of them would earn only up to like 70 cents an hour. I mean, it's just like everything is just so gruesome, you don't even believe it.
And the problem is that, these kinds of things, these kinds of conditions become normalized, where the local residents, and even as this person said, the tourists, really, when they visit Dubai, don't think twice, even though in an other situation you might think, oh, well, this is odd. Why are these people being prevented from entering the mall on this day just because of their class or whatnot? So it's the normalization, I think, that really needs to be somehow
And one really has to name it what it is. It is slavery. One has to really say it.
Yeah.
So
as he did.
Well, and so to that point, maybe as we're seeing this moment of an Arab awakening, maybe part of the awakening is to the rights that the civilians want, the citizens want, but the rights that all people would want. Because this is clearly something where if these people were in their homelands, they may have certain kind of issues, but there's something else that happens when you're an outsider with no recourse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating, and hopefully the labor laws that do exist will either be amended, as you said, as a result of these uprisings. Governments are paying more attention to their citizens.
Well, the governments should know that we are also watching, and we're glad that you're watching. We're going to always be trying to talk about things that we believe matter, but our ideas come from you. So if you want to see us cover something on the stream, tweet us at AJStream. You can join us online, or you can see us tomorrow, same time on your television. We'll see you then.